It all began on an unusually crisp morning at Buckingham Palace, the kind of morning that seems ordinary to the casual eye. Yet beneath the polished marble floors and gilded corridors, tension was brewing that would leave the royal household in shock. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The palace staff had noticed subtle shifts in energy over the past few weeks. Murmurs whispered along the hallways, hushed tones behind closed doors, a silence punctuated only by the soft clatter of silverware in the kitchens and the distant echo of footsteps on the stone corridors. These were not ordinary days for the royal family. Something was looming, and nobody, not even the most seasoned staff members, could predict how the day would unfold. Inside the private meeting room, where chandeliers cast delicate reflections across the ornate walls, the atmosphere was tense. On one side of the long oak table sat Prince William, the future king, usually composed and dignified, his posture upright, yet today betraying a subtle strain. Across from him, Prince Harry entered with an air that was unusual for the youngest royal. There was an intensity in his gaze, a fire that suggested this meeting would not be about pleasantries or family niceties. And at the center, Catherine, the Duchess, poised as always, yet quietly alert, aware of the undercurrents that seemed to ripple through the palace like unseen waves. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, that even the most minor disagreement in this household could escalate quickly, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. The meeting was intended to discuss upcoming charitable initiatives and logistical planning for royal engagements, a seemingly mundane topic. But the truth, as insiders reveal, is that these meetings often serve as more than administrative gatherings. They are microcosms of the family's dynamics, a stage where alliances are tested, grievances aired, and past resentments sometimes ignite into confrontations that leave scars both visible and invisible. The first signs that this would not be an ordinary discussion came subtly. Harry's tone, usually measured when in front of the palace staff, was sharp, precise, almost cutting. His words, seemingly casual on the surface, carried undertones that could not be ignored. Observers describe a methodical build-up, a psychological precision in the way he navigated the conversation, choosing his moments with a deliberate intent to unsettle. Catherine, though composed, recognized the familiar edge. This was the Harry who had once confided private frustrations in the confines of family gatherings. But this time, it was amplified by the presence of staff, making every word heavier, every glance loaded with unintended consequences. William, often the mediator, felt the shift immediately. A prince trained in diplomacy, accustomed to managing both public perception and private discord, sensed the storm before it fully struck. His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the room, aware that the staff, though trained to maintain discretion, were absorbing every moment. There were no cameras here, no reporters waiting in the wings, yet the gravity of the confrontation meant that even the smallest misstep would ripple outward, potentially reaching the tabloids and, inevitably, the public. Then it happened. A comment, subtle at first, a veiled critique aimed at Catherine, meant perhaps to unsettle her composure, or maybe to provoke William himself. But in that instant, the room seemed to shrink. The chandeliers glimmered with an intensity that felt almost accusatory, the polished floor reflecting the tension in stark clarity. Staff members exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement that this was no ordinary royal discussion. Some fidgeted slightly, others fixed their gaze on the intricate patterns of the carpet, attempting to shield themselves from the emotional heat radiating from the table. The words that followed escalated quickly. Harry's attack, as sources describe, was not merely an emotional outburst. It was carefully articulated, almost surgical in the way it struck at Catherine's decisions, her judgment, her very presence. Staff later revealed that the Duchess, who normally commands any room she enters with grace and authority, appeared momentarily destabilized, the kind of human vulnerability rarely seen within the controlled environment of Buckingham Palace. William's reaction was immediate, though initially measured. The tension in his jaw, the slight furrow in his brow, signaled that the mediator, the older brother, was now forced to confront a confrontation head-on. His voice, usually calm and authoritative, began to carry a sharper edge. Observers reported a momentary pause, a breath drawn deep, as William attempted to navigate between familial loyalty, protective instincts, and the unspoken need to maintain order. But the escalation was swift. Harry, emboldened or perhaps consumed by pent-up frustrations, continued to press, his words now sharper, his tone now accusatory, as if laying bare grievances long held in the shadows of public perception. Outside the room, the staff held their collective breath. In a household where appearances are everything, where the public eye constantly scrutinizes every smile, every nod, every subtle expression, this private battle unfolded like an electric storm. Witnesses describe a tangible shift in the energy. Silence mixed with the faintest hints of murmured words, the rustle of papers, a chair shifting slightly on the marble floor. Even the palace walls seemed to absorb the tension, heavy with the weight of familial discord. Catherine, ever composed, attempted to respond with calm reasoning. Her voice, measured and even, sought to defuse the situation, to redirect the focus to the original purpose of the meeting. Yet each attempt was met with renewed criticism, not of her words, but of her presence, her choices, and, ultimately, her influence within the family. The attack was not just verbal. It was strategic, and it tested the very foundations of trust and loyalty between the brothers. William finally pushed beyond the limits of patience, lost control. It was not a dramatic explosion of emotion, but a quiet, piercing intensity that conveyed both disappointment and protective ferocity. Sources say his words, when they came, carried the weight of decades of responsibility, of being the future king tasked with upholding not just the monarchy, but the emotional equilibrium of his family. The room, once a setting of routine planning, had transformed into a crucible, where personal grievances, familial loyalty, and royal decorum collided with an intensity that few had witnessed before. As the confrontation reached its apex, the staff, usually trained to remain invisible, neutral witnesses, felt the gravity of the moment. Conversations stopped, movements halted, even the light seemed to pause in the room. Every observer, from senior aides to junior assistants, understood that this incident would not remain confined within palace walls. Its echoes would ripple through the royal household, through media speculation, and eventually, through the court of public opinion. By the time the meeting adjourned, the air remained charged. Catherine, though composed, carried the invisible weight of the attack. William, though outwardly collected, bore the marks of a rare and personal confrontation. And Harry, whether satisfied or frustrated, had altered the emotional landscape of the household in ways that could not easily be undone. For the staff, for the palace, and ultimately for the monarchy itself, this was a defining moment. A reminder that even in the most controlled environments, human emotions, particularly those tied to family and loyalty, can erupt with consequences that reverberate far beyond a single room. And yet, as shocking as the confrontation was, insiders hint that this was merely the surface. Beneath the words and gestures lies a deeper story, one intertwined with decades of history, unspoken resentments, and the complex web of expectations placed upon the royal family. What exactly was said, why it happened, and how it will affect the relationships within the House of Windsor remains partially shrouded. A mystery that will unfold slowly, like a chess match where each move carries profound implications. But what came next? The private fallout, the whispered conversations, and the emotional reckoning would set the stage for events that none of the palace staff, nor the public, could have anticipated. And it all began that morning in the private meeting room, where protocol collided with raw emotion, and where a brother's attack left a royal household grappling with the fragile balance between duty, loyalty, and family. To truly understand the storm that erupted within Buckingham Palace on that fateful morning, it is essential to step back and examine the intricate, often unseen dynamics that govern the lives of the royal family behind closed doors. The public sees the polished facade, gleaming crowns, carefully curated appearances at state events, photo-perfect smiles at charity galas. But beyond the ceremonial pomp and public spectacle lies a world fraught with tension, legacy, and unspoken expectations. This is the world in which Prince William, Prince Harry, and Catherine navigate. where every gesture, word, and glance carries immense weight. The relationship between William and Harry, the two sons of the late Princess Diana, has always been complex. From a young age, the brothers were subjected to intense scrutiny, a relentless spotlight that magnified even the smallest disagreement. Sources close to the family reveal that while their bond was strong during childhood, the pressures of royal life created subtle fissures over time. William, as the elder, bore the traditional expectations of future kingship, responsibility for continuity, protocol, and legacy. Harry, by contrast, sought a degree of independence, a path that allowed him to define his own identity while grappling with the same pressures. Over the years, these diverging paths cultivated not only mutual love but also friction, tension that could flare under certain circumstances. Catherine's role within this dynamic is equally pivotal. Often described as a stabilizing presence, she is both partner to William and public figure in her own right, navigating the delicate balance between family unity and personal agency. Insiders note that Catherine's grace and poise are complemented by a keen intelligence, an ability to read situations and people with remarkable clarity. Yet, even the most composed individuals are not immune to the pressures of palace life. Within these private meetings, the layers of duty, loyalty, and expectation intersect with human emotion, creating fertile ground for conflicts to emerge. For staff members, understanding these dynamics is both essential and challenging. The palace operates as a meticulously managed ecosystem, where hierarchy, loyalty, and discretion dictate daily operations. Yet, despite strict codes of conduct, staff are often the silent witnesses to the interpersonal dramas that unfold behind closed doors. From minor disagreements over scheduling to significant clashes over family decisions, the staff observe, record mentally, and occasionally intervene subtly, always aware that their role is to facilitate and not interfere. Their perspective offers unique insight into the private lives of royals. Moments of vulnerability, tension, and even conflict that the public rarely glimpses. Historical context further illuminates the significance of the confrontation. The House of Windsor, like any long-standing institution, is built on traditions and expectations. Previous generations faced similar tensions, though often with less media exposure. Royal etiquette has long emphasized composure and restraint, even in moments of personal grievance. Breaking this protocol is not merely a personal matter. It carries implications for the monarchy's image and the perception of stability. When a confrontation occurs, especially one involving senior members and within a formal setting, the impact resonates far beyond the immediate participants. The brothers' history is peppered with moments that, while subtle to outsiders, signal deeper undercurrents. William, meticulous and principled, has often been seen as the embodiment of continuity, the heir who must reconcile personal sentiment with institutional duty. Harry, in contrast, has displayed a willingness to challenge convention, sometimes publicly, sometimes privately, in ways that both complicate and enrich the family dynamic. Catherine, as observer, participant, and mediator, frequently occupies a nuanced position, supportive yet assertive, loyal yet independent. Together, these roles set the stage for any interaction to carry multiple layers of meaning, a delicate balance easily disrupted by emotional intensity or calculated provocation. Insider accounts suggest that tension between the brothers has often revolved around perceived favoritism, divergent visions of public roles, and personal grievances that accumulate over years. Family gatherings, though outwardly composed, have occasionally served as arenas for subtle power dynamics. Words exchanged over breakfast, private jokes at state events, or disagreements over charitable initiatives may seem trivial, but can carry disproportionate weight in a household governed by legacy and perception. This environment breeds a heightened sensitivity to tone, body language, and implication, making private meetings especially volatile when underlying tensions are present. Catherine, keenly aware of the stakes, has historically played a crucial role in mediating disputes. Her presence often diffuses conflict, not through confrontation but through calm authority and emotional intelligence. Yet, even the most skillful mediator cannot always prevent escalation when emotions run high, particularly when one party feels provoked, unheard, or constrained. In such moments, a single comment, gesture, or glance can act as a catalyst, triggering reactions that reverberate across the room and, ultimately, the palace itself. Another critical factor in understanding the context is the role of public scrutiny. The royal family operates under intense observation, where privacy is a luxury and personal matters frequently intersect with public perception. Every disagreement, every misstep, is potentially amplified, dissected, and interpreted by both the media and the public. This pressure creates a unique environment. Personal feelings must constantly negotiate with public responsibility. For William, Harry, and Catherine, navigating these dual realities is a delicate, often exhausting endeavor. A moment of private conflict, therefore, is never just private. It carries the weight of legacy, reputation, and the expectations of millions who watch, both formally and informally, across the globe. It is within this layered, high-pressure environment that the confrontation occurred. Understanding the private dynamics helps explain why what might appear trivial from the outside, an argument over phrasing, a disagreement on strategy, or a critique of decision-making, can escalate into a significant emotional event. Staff members recall subtle signals that indicated rising tension: shifts in posture, tightened expressions, deliberate pauses in conversation, and the occasional flicker of impatience. These small cues, when compounded over time, form a backdrop against which even the most composed individuals may react with unexpected intensity. The palace itself, with its centuries of history, grand architecture, and symbolic weight, adds another dimension to the context. Each room, corridor, and chamber carries the echoes of generations past, a silent reminder of duty and expectation. When conflict arises within these spaces, it is magnified by both physical and symbolic dimensions. The confrontation was not merely interpersonal. It occurred within a setting steeped in tradition and observation, intensifying the stakes and heightening the emotional resonance. Understanding these factors, historical precedent, familial dynamics, staff perspective, public scrutiny, and environmental influence, provides a clearer picture of why the events of that morning were so consequential. The tension between Harry and William was never a simple disagreement. It was the culmination of years of accumulated pressures, nuanced grievances, and unspoken expectations. Catherine, as both participant and observer, was caught in the crossfire, her composure tested by forces beyond her control, yet also revealing the resilience and intelligence that define her public and private persona. As we piece together these insights, it becomes evident that the confrontation was not an isolated incident, but rather a window into the complex, multifaceted lives of the royal family. It highlights the human vulnerabilities beneath the ceremonial regalia and reminds us that even those born into privilege and position must navigate emotion, expectation, and family loyalty in ways that are profoundly relatable. The staff's role in witnessing these events further emphasizes the intensity of the moment. From subtle glances exchanged in hallways to whispered observations in adjoining rooms, they provide a humanizing lens on a world often portrayed as impermeable and stoic. Their accounts reveal a spectrum of reactions: concern for Catherine's emotional well-being, admiration for William's measured authority, and curiosity, or even apprehension, regarding Harry's boldness in confronting family members in a formal setting. These perspectives help contextualize the confrontation, illustrating both the emotional and operational complexity of palace life. Yet, despite these insights, certain questions remain. What underlying issues drove Harry to confront Catherine so forcefully in front of staff? How did William's response reflect both personal and institutional pressures? And, most critically, what impact would this incident have on the delicate equilibrium of the royal household going forward? These questions set the stage for a narrative that is not only about conflict but also about understanding, negotiation, and the intricate balance between duty and emotion. As the layers of context unfold, it becomes clear that this confrontation was as inevitable as it was shocking. The combination of personal history, family dynamics, public scrutiny, and environmental factors created a situation in which emotions, once triggered, could not be contained. The events of that morning are emblematic of the broader challenges faced by the royal family, challenges that blend personal emotion with public responsibility, and where the consequences of a single interaction can echo far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. The morning of the meeting dawned with a quiet sense of normalcy outside Buckingham Palace, a deceptive calm that belied the storm about to erupt inside its walls. Sunlight streamed through the towering windows, glinting off ornate chandeliers and casting long shadows across polished floors. Yet inside, a tension lingered in the air that could be felt by anyone attuned to the subtle rhythms of palace life. Staff had arrived early, as they always did, preparing for the day's schedule, organizing documents, and ensuring that every detail adhered to the meticulous standards expected in the royal household. From the outside, everything appeared routine. Couriers delivering messages, aides reviewing schedules, the sound of soft footsteps in the corridors. But those attuned to the palace's inner workings sensed a ripple, a barely perceptible shift in the usual energy. It was the kind of tension that builds slowly, hypnotic. Sources indicate that the first few moments of escalation were subtle yet significant. A passing remark about planning priorities, phrased innocuously, was interpreted as criticism. A suggestion regarding public messaging was perceived as undermining authority. These small sparks, compounded by years of accumulated tension, created a situation where emotional responses were inevitable. Staff recall a barely perceptible stiffening of posture, a sharpening of gaze, and the deepening quiet that accompanies high-stakes interpersonal conflict. As the discussion progressed, Harry began to assert his points with increasing emphasis. His observations, while framed as constructive critique, carried the weight of personal judgment. Catherine, maintaining composure, countered each assertion with measured responses, highlighting rationale, evidence, and consideration for the broader implications. William's reactions, while outwardly restrained, revealed the pressure he felt to uphold familial stability while also protecting Catherine from what he perceived as undue aggression. The tension was not only verbal but also profoundly physical. Subtle movements, hands resting tensely on the table, shifting weight in chairs, a deepening of eye contact, conveyed emotions that words alone could not capture. Staff, trained to recognize and interpret these cues, sensed the escalation in real time, understanding that the meeting had transitioned from routine discussion to a confrontation of significant emotional and relational consequence. Insider accounts suggest that certain topics acted as triggers, activating unresolved issues and historical grievances. Discussions that might seem mundane externally, priorities in charitable work, public engagement strategies, or coordination of family responsibilities, were imbued with layers of personal significance. Each comment, each suggestion, was filtered through years of accumulated experience, expectations, and subtle resentments, amplifying their impact beyond their apparent meaning. Catherine's strategic communication was critical during this phase. By maintaining calm, articulating reasoning clearly, and emphasizing shared goals, she attempted to prevent escalation while asserting her perspective. Yet, despite her efforts, Harry's deliberate approach, marked by intensity and precision, continued to apply pressure, challenging not only her positions but also the equilibrium William sought to maintain. Observers note that the palace staff, while trained to remain unobtrusive, became silent witnesses to a rapidly escalating emotional landscape. Their role was both critical and precarious: to support the functioning of the household without interfering, to anticipate needs without intruding, and to observe dynamics that might later inform broader decisions or communications. The collective awareness of those present heightened the gravity of the moment, each person acutely aware that this interaction would resonate beyond the immediate confines of the room. By mid-morning, the air in the room had transformed from polite formality to a charged environment of subtle threats, carefully measured criticism, and defensive posturing. The confrontation, though still restrained by decorum, had begun to crystallize, with clear lines drawn in the relational dynamics between the participants. William's measured patience, Catherine's poised responses, and Harry's assertive approach created a tense triangle, a collision of roles, expectations, and emotional undercurrents. It was in this atmosphere, dense with anticipation and carefully navigated tension, that the first overt signs of emotional escalation appeared. A pointed question from Harry, interpreted by some staff as a direct challenge to Catherine's judgment, shifted the room irreversibly. The words themselves were less important than the underlying implications. The questioning of authority, the exposure of vulnerabilities, and the subtle assertion of dominance within a highly hierarchical environment. William, recognizing the potential for escalation, attempted to intervene. His tone remained calm, authoritative, yet imbued with an urgency that underscored the seriousness of the situation. He sought to redirect the conversation to neutral ground, emphasizing shared objectives and long-term considerations. Catherine, equally aware, continued to respond with logic and composure, seeking to deflect personal attacks while defending her position. Harry, however, remained focused, leveraging both timing and language to maintain pressure, gradually increasing the emotional stakes for all involved. By the time the first hour had elapsed, the meeting had evolved from a routine administrative discussion into a crucible of personal and familial tension. Staff members, initially observers, were now acutely aware of the emotional intensity, documenting in their minds the patterns of escalation, the strategic positioning of each participant, and the subtle signals that indicated where boundaries might be breached. Every gesture, every word, was laden with significance, contributing to an atmosphere that was both fragile and volatile. It was in this context, the precise interplay of preparation, historical tension, emotional intelligence, and high-stakes environment, that the confrontation reached its threshold. The meeting, intended to organize and coordinate, had become a microcosm of the broader dynamics within the royal family. A collision of duty, expectation, personal ambition, and deeply human emotion. The events of that morning, observed by staff and shaped by decades of relational history, set the stage for the dramatic confrontation that would follow, a moment that would test loyalties, reveal vulnerabilities, and redefine the emotional landscape of the household. The moment that would later be described by palace staff as a turning point arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet its impact would reverberate far beyond the confines of the private meeting room. After hours of discussion, structured agendas, and polite exchanges, a subtle shift occurred, a combination of word choice, tone, and timing, that transformed a controlled conversation into a personal confrontation. Observers later recounted how the room seemed to contract around the participants, the chandeliers reflecting an almost tangible tension, the polished floors mirroring the intensity of emotions that simmered just beneath the surface. Harry, who had until that point maintained a degree of restraint, chose that precise moment to escalate the conversation. His words, carefully constructed yet sharply pointed, targeted Catherine's decision-making in ways that were both direct and insinuating. According to sources, the attack was not impulsive. It was measured, deliberate, designed to expose perceived weaknesses and challenge authority within a space where hierarchy and decorum were usually unquestioned. The tone of his voice, firm yet laden with accusation, carried the unmistakable weight of frustration accumulated over years of unresolved grievances. Catherine, caught in the sudden intensity of the exchange, responded with calm precision. Her measured tone, deliberate gestures, and composed demeanor were intended to neutralize the tension, to maintain equilibrium not only for her own sake but for the stability of the meeting itself. Yet even as she articulated her points with clarity and authority, Harry's insistence and pointed commentary continued to press against the boundaries of patience. Each rebuttal, each clarification from Catherine, was met with renewed scrutiny, as if the room itself were testing the limits of composure and emotional control. William, seated between them, faced the most difficult position. As both elder brother and mediator, he was tasked with maintaining order, protecting Catherine from personal attacks, and upholding the decorum expected in royal engagements. His initial attempts to intervene were subtle: a raised eyebrow, a carefully phrased question, an attempt to redirect the discussion toward neutral topics. Yet, each of these interventions, while designed to de-escalate, was countered by Harry's relentless focus. The dynamics of the confrontation had shifted. It was no longer a routine meeting but a psychological battleground, where each participant navigated both the explicit dialogue and the unspoken undercurrents of emotion and history. Staff members present later described the scene as electric, their observations tinged with both awe and apprehension. The subtle interplay of tension, authority, and vulnerability was palpable. From the quiet shuffle of papers to the deliberate placement of hands on the table, every gesture communicated meaning. Observers noted Catherine's strategic calm, William's quiet intensity, and Harry's unyielding assertiveness, each contributing to a complex choreography of conflict that few outside the palace could ever fully comprehend. The content of Harry's attack, while shielded from the public eye, centered on criticisms that were both personal and procedural. He reportedly challenged Catherine's approach to upcoming engagements, questioned her judgment in family-related matters, and, most provocatively, implied that certain decisions had been made without full transparency or consideration of broader implications. The weight of his words was amplified by their delivery. Measured, unwavering, and directed with an intensity that few could withstand without responding in kind. Catherine's responses were equally calculated, balancing the need to defend her position with the desire to avoid escalating the conflict further. She invoked rationale, cited historical precedent within the family, and highlighted the responsibilities inherent in her role. Yet even as she articulated her reasoning, Harry's persistence created an atmosphere in which the boundaries between professional discussion and personal attack blurred. Staff members reported sensing a shift in energy, the room's formal structure giving way to a more volatile emotional landscape. William's struggle was not merely about managing the immediate conflict. It was also about navigating the implications of the confrontation for the broader family dynamic. Each intervention, each attempt at mediation, had to be carefully measured to avoid exacerbating tensions. Sources indicate that William's tone shifted subtly over time, moving from measured calm to firm assertion, reflecting both the protective instinct he felt toward Catherine and the responsibility he bore as heir apparent. His presence, though authoritative, was now imbued with an emotional intensity rarely witnessed in the formal confines of palace meetings. The staff, though trained to remain neutral, became inadvertent participants in the unfolding drama. Their observations, ranging from the fleeting expressions exchanged between the brothers to the nuanced body language of Catherine, provided an intimate record of the confrontation. Some noted the tightening of shoulders, the narrowing of eyes, the controlled exhalations of breath as each participant navigated the verbal exchanges. These subtle cues, imperceptible to an untrained eye, conveyed volumes about the emotional stakes of the encounter. As the conversation progressed, Harry intensified his focus, moving from critique to pointed challenges that struck at the heart of familial loyalty and trust. His approach was strategic, almost surgical, designed to unsettle and provoke while maintaining the veneer of decorum. Catherine, recognizing the dual nature of the confrontation, both personal and procedural, adapted her responses accordingly, alternating between calm reasoning and subtle reinforcement of authority. William, observing the interplay, faced the mounting pressure of maintaining balance, aware that a misstep could escalate the situation beyond control. The physical environment of the room contributed subtly to the dynamics. The high ceilings, ornate furnishings, and reflective surfaces amplified the intensity, creating an echo chamber of emotion and expression. Staff members noted that even ambient sounds, the quiet shifting of chairs, the soft rustle of papers, were accentuated, contributing to a sense of heightened tension. Within this environment, every word and gesture carried amplified weight, shaping the trajectory of the confrontation and influencing the reactions of those present. Midway through the exchange, the stakes escalated further. Harry reportedly made direct statements that challenged Catherine's authority in ways that resonated beyond the immediate conversation. The subtext of these remarks suggested deep-seated grievances, not just about specific decisions but about perceived imbalances in influence, attention, and familial recognition. Catherine's ability to maintain composure under this pressure was tested, highlighting both her resilience and the emotional intelligence required to navigate such a charged environment. William, increasingly aware of the potential consequences, shifted his strategy. Instead of attempting to mediate through calm appeals alone, he began asserting more direct authority, signaling to both Harry and Catherine that certain boundaries could not be crossed. This transition, from subtle mediation to firm intervention, marked a critical turning point in the confrontation. Staff described a palpable change in energy. The room became more charged, every gesture and glance laden with significance, and the previously invisible lines of loyalty and authority suddenly visible in stark relief. Catherine, sensing both the personal and institutional stakes, maintained a delicate balance. She continued to articulate her reasoning, emphasizing shared objectives and long-term goals, while also subtly signaling her resilience in the face of pointed criticism. Her composure served not only as a counterbalance to Harry's assertiveness, but also as a stabilizing force for William, who relied on her calm presence to navigate the increasingly tense environment. Observers report that Harry's persistence created moments of heightened emotional intensity, brief but powerful flashes in which the veneer of control threatened to crack. Staff recalled seeing micro-expressions, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of the eyes, a subtle inhale of breath that hinted at the underlying emotional turbulence. These fleeting cues, imperceptible to most, were magnified in the context of the room's charged atmosphere, signaling the imminent escalation that would soon define the confrontation. By the time the first hour of this intensified exchange had passed, the dynamics of the meeting had shifted irrevocably. What began as a discussion of operational matters had transformed into a complex interplay of assertion, defense, and emotional negotiation. The confrontation, still contained within the walls of the private meeting room, carried implications far beyond its immediate context, reflecting broader patterns of tension, loyalty, and expectation within the royal household. It was at this point that the first signs of emotional strain in William became apparent. While his composure remained outwardly intact, subtle indicators, the tightening of shoulders, the controlled cadence of his voice, and the sharpness of his responses, revealed the depth of pressure he was experiencing. Catherine, despite her calm exterior, exhibited similar micro-expressions of strain, demonstrating the human cost of navigating such an intense encounter. Harry, for his part, appeared fully aware of the impact of his words and actions, a calculated intensity driving his approach and further escalating the stakes. The crescendo of tension that had been building over the course of the meeting reached its apex in a moment that staff would later describe as unprecedented within Buckingham Palace. Prince William, usually the epitome of measured composure and calculated restraint, reached a point where the accumulated pressure, the relentless questioning, the pointed critiques, and the palpable undercurrent of challenge broke through his carefully maintained exterior. The shift was subtle at first. A sharper tone, a deeper exhale, a hardening in his gaze. Yet these minor signals carried a weight that resonated throughout the room, signaling that the private confrontation had entered a critical stage. Harry, sensing a shift, pressed further. Each word, each carefully constructed phrase, was designed not merely to challenge Catherine but to provoke a response from William himself. Observers noted that the younger prince's intensity was almost palpable, a combination of pent-up emotion and calculated strategy that left little room for misinterpretation. Catherine, meanwhile, maintained a calm exterior, but staff later reported that her hands, resting on the table, clenched subtly, a small but telling sign of the emotional strain she was enduring. William's initial attempts to redirect the conversation and de-escalate the situation had proven insufficient. The earlier strategies, subtle gestures, measured interjections, appeals to shared objectives were no longer effective. The room, once dominated by polite formalities and professional decorum, had transformed into a charged arena of psychological intensity. Every glance, every pause, every breath carried meaning. The chandeliers reflected not just light, but the tension that saturated the space, turning the polished floors into a mirror of the emotions that simmered unchecked. At the breaking point, William's voice, usually calm and authoritative, gained an edge that immediately captured the attention of everyone present. He spoke with a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation, each word deliberate, weighted with both authority and personal conviction. Staff members later described the effect as electric. The air itself seemed to respond, the subtle movements in the room freezing as all participants processed the shift in energy. It was the rare moment when a royal's private emotion collided with public expectation, a breach of protocol that nonetheless felt justified in the intensity of the moment. Harry, however, did not relent. Whether fueled by frustration, determination, or a desire to assert his perspective, he continued to press, escalating the confrontation even further. His tone, though measured in delivery, carried an unmistakable sharpness, a deliberate edge intended to challenge authority and provoke a response. Catherine, sensing the intensity of the moment, remained composed outwardly but internally was acutely aware of the stakes. She had faced pressure before, both in public and private contexts. Yet this situation, confronted simultaneously by her husband's protective instincts and Harry's assertive challenge, was unique in its emotional complexity. William's breaking point was not marked by an explosive outburst but rather by a piercing clarity of assertion. He spoke with precision, addressing both the content of Harry's critiques and the underlying implications of his approach. Observers report that the words were measured yet forceful, a combination of reasoning and emotional weight that conveyed both disapproval and protective concern. It was the first time in that meeting that the confrontation felt truly personal, transcending procedural disagreements to touch on issues of trust, loyalty, and family responsibility. The physical atmosphere mirrored the emotional intensity. William's posture became more rigid, his hands resting firmly on the table, as if anchoring himself against the tide of conflict. Catherine's movements, while minimal, suggested controlled tension. Subtle shifts in seating, a deepening of her breathing, a poised adjustment of her gaze. Harry, fully aware of the shift, maintained his assertive presence. Yet there was a flicker of uncertainty, a subtle acknowledgement that William's response car. As Harry's words began to pierce the careful equilibrium of the meeting, Catherine's immediate response was one of controlled observation. She listened attentively, parsing not only the content of his statements but also the subtext, the tone, and the intent behind each critique. Her mind, trained by years of engagement in both public and private domains, worked quickly to assess which points were substantive, which were emotionally charged, and which were strategically intended to provoke reaction. This cognitive assessment allowed her to maintain outward composure while internally preparing nuanced responses that would protect her credibility, preserve relational stability, and reinforce her position. One of Catherine's key strategies during this phase was the use of measured verbal responses. She spoke with clarity, choosing words that were precise yet neutral, balancing assertiveness with diplomacy. When challenged directly, she acknowledged the concerns raised, provided context grounded in facts or prior planning, and subtly redirected the conversation toward shared objectives. This approach served multiple purposes. It demonstrated her competence, defused potential escalation, and subtly signaled to William and Harry that she was both aware of the dynamics at play and capable of navigating them effectively. Physically, Catherine's poise played a crucial role in managing the emotional landscape. Staff members later described how her posture, hand placement, and eye contact conveyed calm authority even as the intensity of the room increased. Subtle micro-adjustments, such as a deliberate shift in seating, controlled breathing, and composed hand gestures, reinforced her verbal strategies, creating a synergy between body language and speech that projected confidence and stability. These techniques, honed over years of public appearances and private negotiations, allowed her to withstand the pressure of Harry's assertive critiques without appearing defensive or vulnerable. At the same time, Catherine was acutely aware of the relational implications of the confrontation. The attack was not directed solely at her professional judgment but carried an implicit challenge to her role within the family and her influence on William. She understood that her responses would not only affect the immediate outcome of the meeting, but also shape perceptions of loyalty, authority, and alliance within the royal household. Balancing these relational dynamics required careful calibration. Responding too forcefully could escalate tensions with Harry, while appearing passive could undermine her credibility and disrupt the delicate equilibrium with William. Internally, Catherine experienced a complex mixture of emotions. Frustration and concern were naturally present, as she navigated the challenge of being personally critiqued in front of staff and family. Yet alongside these feelings were determination, strategic focus, and a deep sense of responsibility toward maintaining both personal integrity and familial cohesion. Observers note that her ability to regulate these internal emotions, translating them into controlled external behavior, was central to her effectiveness during the confrontation. It was a demonstration of emotional regulation at a level few ever witness, a skill cultivated through both experience and innate composure. Catherine also relied on empathy as a guiding principle. Recognizing that William's and Harry's actions were influenced not only by the immediate discussion but also by years of personal history, she approached her responses with an understanding of the broader context. She anticipated potential triggers, considered the impact of each statement, and sought to craft her words in ways that would reduce unnecessary friction while still asserting her perspective. This empathetic approach allowed her to maintain relational bridges even amid a highly charged confrontation, highlighting her ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with sensitivity and intelligence. Staff observations further illuminate the subtlety of Catherine's strategic approach. Witnesses described moments where she interjected with clarifying questions, offered context, or reframed contentious points in ways that diffused potential escalation. Her use of pacing, allowing pauses for reflection, choosing moments to speak with deliberate timing, created opportunities to guide the conversation toward constructive outcomes. This approach not only diffused immediate tension but also reinforced her credibility and authority within the context of the discussion. Staff later described these moments as masterful exercises in diplomacy under pressure, reflecting both her skill and her composure. The emotional intensity of the meeting was further heightened by the presence of palace staff, who, while silent and discreet, contributed an additional layer of complexity. Catherine was aware that her responses were being observed, not only by the brothers but by individuals trained to recognize nuance and report insights. This awareness added pressure but also reinforced her commitment to maintaining composure and demonstrating leadership. Her ability to navigate this multidimensional environment, balancing personal, relational, and observational factors, was a testament to her adaptability and strategic thinking. Throughout the confrontation, Catherine also leveraged nonverbal cues to assert presence and authority. A measured gaze, a subtle adjustment of posture, and carefully timed gestures reinforced her verbal strategies. These actions conveyed confidence, control, and attentiveness, signaling to both Harry and William that she was fully engaged and capable of navigating the complexities of the encounter. Staff noted that these nonverbal elements were critical in shaping the perception of the meeting, underscoring her ability to influence the emotional and psychological landscape without overtly escalating conflict. As the intensity of the confrontation reached its peak, Catherine's internal focus shifted toward long-term implications. She considered not only the immediate resolution of the discussion but also the broader impact on family dynamics, public perception, and institutional stability. Her responses reflected a strategic balancing of short-term engagement with long-term foresight, highlighting her capacity to operate effectively under pressure while maintaining awareness of the broader context. Ultimately, Catherine's perspective during the confrontation illustrates a combination of resilience, intelligence, and emotional sophistication. She navigated a situation marked by personal attack, familial tension, and high stakes with a blend of calm authority, strategic articulation, and empathetic awareness. Her ability to maintain composure, guide the conversation, and protect relational and institutional integrity provides insight into her role within the royal household and the qualities that enable her to operate effectively under extraordinary pressure. By the time the confrontation began to subside, Catherine had not only preserved her position but had also influenced the trajectory of the meeting. Her strategic interventions, composed demeanor, and emotional regulation helped stabilize the room, allowing William's authority to assert itself while providing Harry with space to recalibrate. The meeting concluded with a delicate balance restored, though the emotional resonance of the encounter lingered, shaping the perceptions and decisions of all involved. Within the carefully managed world of Buckingham Palace, staff are often trained to observe without interference, to remain discreet witnesses to the interactions of the royal family. Yet on the day of the confrontation between Prince William, Prince Harry, and Catherine, even the most seasoned employees found themselves captivated, emotionally invested, and, in some cases, caught off guard by the intensity of the exchange. For many staff members, this meeting was more than a routine administrative gathering. It was a rare glimpse into the raw and deeply human dynamics that underpin the royal family. From the outset, staff were acutely aware that the energy in the room deviated from the usual calm, composed environment. Subtle cues, shifts in posture, tightening of hands, deliberate pauses, signaled that what was occurring was not a typical discussion. Observers report a collective sense of anticipation, an almost electric awareness that the meeting would escalate beyond normal protocol. Senior aides discreetly exchanged glances, noting micro-expressions and body language, mentally cataloging the unfolding drama while maintaining the outward appearance of professional detachment. One of the most striking aspects of staff observation was the emotional intensity emanating from the participants. William, whose composure is often regarded as unflappable, exhibited signs of mounting tension that staff interpreted as both protective and exasperated. His voice, measured yet carrying an unmistakable edge, commanded attention without raising volume, a subtle reminder of authority and responsibility. Catherine's poise, in contrast, remained impeccable, but insiders later noted the small, human indicators of stress: a controlled inhale, a fleeting tightening of the jaw, and the subtle adjustment of her seating. These signals, though minute, conveyed volumes to those trained to read them, providing insight into the emotional landscape of the confrontation. Harry's presence, as staff described, was the catalyst for much of the room's heightened tension. His deliberate choice of words, assertive tone, and strategic pacing created an environment where both Catherine and William were forced to navigate not only the content of the discussion but also the underlying emotional currents. Staff noted that he appeared fully aware of the psychological impact of his words, using timing, emphasis, and subtle nonverbal cues to maximize effect. The combination of preparation and intensity made his critiques feel targeted, precise, and inescapable. As the meeting progressed, staff reactions varied. Some maintained rigid composure, fulfilling their professional obligation to observe without interfering. Others found themselves unconsciously leaning forward, eyes tracking every gesture, ears attuned to every nuance in tone and phrasing. Even subtle movements, like the shift of a hand, a step closer to the table, or a pause before responding, were interpreted as meaningful signals of emotional state or intent. For palace staff, trained to be acutely aware of such details, this was a moment of exceptional observation, a rare opportunity to witness the intersection of protocol, personality, and emotion. The presence of staff also introduced a layer of complexity to the confrontation. Their awareness that every reaction, microexpression, and response could be observed and, in rare cases, relayed externally created a subtle feedback loop. Participants, while engaged in the immediate exchange, were also aware, consciously or unconsciously, that staff were documenting behavior, noting deviations from expected conduct, and interpreting the relational dynamics in real time. This dual awareness of the conversation itself and of the observation intensified the pressure on all parties, magnifying the stakes and shaping responses. Several staff members reported moments of internal conflict during the confrontation. Their loyalty to the royal family, commitment to discretion, and understanding of institutional hierarchy clashed with the human instinct to respond emotionally or intervene. Some experienced empathy for Catherine, noting the difficulty of being personally challenged in a high-pressure environment. Others felt concern for William, recognizing the weight of both familial and institutional responsibility he bore. These emotional responses, though unspoken, contributed to the collective tension in the room, reinforcing the sense that the meeting had transcended its nominal purpose. The observations extended beyond immediate physical cues. Staff also noted the psychological interplay between the brothers and Catherine, the subtle dance of assertion, defense, and mediation that defined the confrontation. Harry's deliberate pressure tested both Catherine's composure and William's patience. Catherine's measured responses sought to deflect personal critique while maintaining authority. William's interventions balanced protection, mediation, and assertion of hierarchy. For staff, this triad created a living study in relational dynamics, a high-stakes exercise in emotional intelligence that unfolded in real time before their eyes. Even after the confrontation subsided, staff awareness remained heightened. Observers noted lingering micro-expressions of residual tension, fleeting eye contact, subtle shifts in posture, and measured tones that suggested ongoing internal processing. These signs indicated that, while the immediate escalation had concluded, the emotional impact of the encounter persisted. Staff, ever vigilant, continued to document and mentally process these cues, understanding that the dynamics of the meeting would inform both future interactions within the household and the broader functioning of the royal family. In the days following the meeting, whispers began to circulate among staff. Though the palace maintains strict codes of discretion, subtle rumors inevitably emerged, carried in hushed conversations and fleeting exchanges. Some staff speculated on the content of Harry's critiques, others debated the implications of William's response, and a few questioned how Catherine's resilience would influence subsequent interactions. These discussions, though informal and often fragmented, reflected the natural human inclination to interpret and make sense of emotionally charged events, even within a professional environment. Leaked information, whether intentional or accidental, began to seep into the broader narrative. Staff members, constrained by duty and discretion, nonetheless provided contextual hints to trusted intermediaries. These hints, while never fully explicit, contributed to early media speculation about the confrontation. Reporters and royal commentators, attuned to patterns of palace dynamics, began to piece together narratives, relying on fragmentary accounts to craft stories that captured public attention. The interplay between private observation and public reporting illustrates the delicate balance that staff must maintain, honoring confidentiality while navigating the unavoidable reality that moments of emotional intensity rarely remain fully contained. The staff's perspective also highlighted the human cost of such confrontations. While the royals are often perceived as distant or insulated, the emotional resonance of the meeting impacted not only those directly involved but also the individuals tasked with supporting the household. Observers described heightened stress, emotional fatigue, and a keen awareness of the potential consequences of misinterpreting or mishandling information. The confrontation became, in effect, a shared experience, shaping perceptions, judgments, and the emotional atmosphere within the palace long after the room had emptied. One particularly revealing aspect of staff observation was the subtle acknowledgement of power dynamics. While hierarchy is always present in royal settings, the confrontation made these dynamics explicitly visible. William's authority, both relational and institutional, was asserted with clarity. Harry's challenge, while personal and strategic, highlighted tensions inherent in balancing familial loyalty with individual agency. Catherine's composure and strategic navigation reinforced her influence, demonstrating that power within the household is multifaceted, situational, and contingent upon both behavior and perception. Staff also noted the impact of timing and pacing within the confrontation. Moments of silence, deliberate pauses, and shifts in conversational tempo amplified the emotional intensity, providing windows of reflection, anticipation, and tension. These temporal elements, while subtle, shaped the experience for both participants and observers, underscoring the intricate choreography of verbal and nonverbal communication that defines high-stakes interactions in the palace. Ultimately, the staff's experience of the confrontation underscores a fundamental truth. Even within institutions defined by protocol, tradition, and hierarchy, human emotion remains a powerful and unpredictable force. Observers bore witness not only to the content of the exchange, but to the relational, emotional, and psychological dynamics that shaped the encounter. Their accounts reveal a layered, nuanced understanding of royal life, providing insight into the complexity of interactions that are often hidden from public view. The leaking of partial details to trusted intermediaries and, eventually, to the press, highlights the delicate balance between confidentiality and human curiosity. While no staff member intentionally sought to undermine the household, the mere act of observation and informal discussion contributed to narratives that reached broader audiences. These early leaks, often fragmentary and speculative, amplified public interest and added an additional layer of pressure, further complicating the royal family's management of both private and public perception. In reflection, The staff's perspective offers a unique lens on the confrontation. It reveals not only the emotional and psychological intensity of the encounter, but also the broader implications for communication, loyalty, and institutional integrity within Buckingham Palace. Their observations illuminate the human side of royal life, highlighting the challenges, strategies, and resilience required to navigate moments of unprecedented tension while maintaining professionalism and discretion. To fully grasp the gravity of the confrontation between Prince William, Prince Harry, and Catherine, it is essential to examine the history of conflict within the House of Windsor. Royal families, by their very nature, operate within high-pressure environments where personal emotion, duty, and public perception intersect. While the public often sees a polished exterior, state events, official portraits, and well-curated public appearances, the reality is that internal disputes have been a constant undercurrent across generations. Historical records and biographical accounts reveal numerous instances where disagreements within the royal family erupted behind closed doors, sometimes subtly, sometimes with considerable intensity. These conflicts often revolved around the tension between individual agency and the strictures of duty, the clash between